So today's daf is Kuf Ayin 170, and we're picking up on Kuf Samech Tes Amud Beis 169b, 4 lines up from the bottom. Tan Rabbanon, Haba Lidon B'Shtar B'Chazaka Lidon B'Shtar Divrei Rebbe. It's a very interesting case. So let's say Ruvain is claiming that Shimon sold him land, and Ruvain is proving his claim both through a shtar, he has a document, and chazaka. He's also used the land for 3 years uncontested. So which one of those two do you utilize in order to go ahead and certify his claim? So Rabbi says, Nidon b'shtar. Rabbi says that we go ahead and we use the shtar over the chazaka. Rabbi Shmuel says no, omer bechazaka. He says that again, when faced with a decision between shtar and chazaka, ultimately again, we go with chazaka. By my kamiflagi, so I asks the Gemara, what's the machlokis over here? So Kiyas Rabdimi Amr Ba'osios Niknos B'Mesira kamiflagi. The machlokis over here, interestingly enough, is the topic that we've been talking about the last couple of, at least yesterday's daf and the day before as well, about Osios Niknos B'Mesira, namely that halacha l'maisa, when you give over a shtar, do you give over the totality of the transaction together with that shtar? So we'll say now we are on Kuf Aleph. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel Silber holds like this, top of Kuf Aleph. Savar ein osios niknos b'mesira. So Rabbi Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa. So again, handing over a shtar does not really hand over the entirety of the transaction. If you look at the Rashbam says hilchach tzarich edi chazaka dechevan da'amar leidach ein dechevan da'amar leidach lechazik v'kani v'yesh lo edim shechzik ba kana dekarka niknas bekesef b'shtar mechira matana bechazaka. So it's interesting. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel holds ein osios niknos b'mesira. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, you don't inquire the totality of the transaction through the shtar, and therefore, again, when you have both shtar and chazaka is stronger. Rabbi Savra osios niknas b'mesira. Rabbi, on the other hand, holds that no. Again, we've been talking about when you go ahead and you hand over the shtar, that gives over the totality of the transaction. Amar le'abayi imkein plota ledemar. So Abayi, so remember again, I will say this statement. Sorry, just going to staple papers over here. So this statement, remember again, was Rav Dimi. So Rav Dimi, so they said this before Abayi. So Amar le'abayi imkein plota ledemar. So it said to Abayi, if that's the case, Rav Dimi is arguing on your interpretation before. Amar le'visivlo. Abayi says okay. So go ahead and let it be a machlokas. So again, so Abayi says to Rav Dimi, if again this is Abayi. So Amar le'abayi le'Rav Dimi. So imkein plota. Take a look at the Rashbam. Debarech Demar, Shomer Rabbi Lamal, Reb Shimon Osios Niknas b'Mesira. Because remember again beforehand earlier we had said that according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, Osios Niknas b'Mesira, and now ultimately again Rav Dimi is saying that according to Reb Shimon Gamliel, ain't Osios Niknas b'Mesira. So he says, Im Kein Tiflok. Okay, this is Machlokas. Amarlei Hachi Kamina Lacha Masnisa Lo Mitaratsta Ela Kid Mitaratsta Mar. No, what he meant to say is like this. The way we answered up the Mishnah earlier only works according to the interpretation we gave before. If that's the case, we now have a contradiction. In other words, does Reb Shimon Gamliel hold Osios B'Nikos B'Mesira or not? Allah Amar Abayi says, what's the case over here? Remember, we're focusing on the case of where Ruvain is claiming that he owns the land, and he wants to certify that claim both through shtar and chazaka. So which one should we utilize? So again, Rebbe says shtar, Rabbi Shmuel Silber says chazaka. So we thought that maybe it's a machlokes of osios niknas b'mesira. The problem is, the way we just positioned it is Rabbi Shmuel Silber is contradicting himself. Allah Amar Abayi says, what's the case here? Kegon shenimtza echad mehen karov upasal. Interestingly enough, the case over here is when Ruvain presents the shtar, one of the witnesses in the shtar turns out to be a relative, or someone who is unfit for edus. Ubeplukted Rabbi Meir Rabbi Lazar kamiflagi. And the machlokes over here is different machlokes of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Lazar. What's the machlokes? Rabbi Savalak Rabbi Lazar da Amar Edi Mesira Karsi, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Savalak Rabbi Meir da Amar Edi Chasima Karsi. So this is interesting. So now the Gemara is suggesting as follows. So what's the issue? Ruvain presents this shtar, right? And in this shtar, so Ruvain has shtar and chazaka. The issue over here is that in the shtar, it turns out one of the witnesses is invalid. So now watch this. So Rabbi holds like Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar holds Edim Mesira Karsi. Now remember, we'll say back to our Gittin days. So again, what creates the effectiveness of the shtar? Is it the Edim who witnessed the giving over of the shtar, or is it the witnesses who sign on the shtar? Rabbi Lazar holds that it is the witnesses who witnessed the giving over of the shtar. If that's the case, the witnesses who signed on the shtar aren't really all that important. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, even if it turns out that one of them is a karov or apostle, the shtar itself is still a valid shtar. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, he would go with the idea that when faced with a choice between shtar and chazaka, go with shtar. On the other hand, Rabbi Shmuel holds that halacha l'maisa, no, it's the witnesses who sign on the shtar that create the effectiveness of the shtar. And therefore, again, if one of the witnesses who signed on it is invalid, then better off to go with chazaka than to go with shtar. But 1 second, we learned that Rabbi Lazar, even Rabbi Lazar holds a Mesira Karsi, so it's the witnesses who witness the giving over of the shtar that really create the effectiveness of the transaction. But even Rabbi Lazar holds that if clearly you have a shtar that looks inappropriate, what does it mean it looks inappropriate? For example, again, you have a karov or apostle who signed on it. Even Rabbi Lazar will agree that such a shtar is possible. Ela Amar Rabbi Avina Hakol Modim Shimkasu Bo Huskaknu LeEdusan Shel Edim V'Nimtzas Edusan Mizuyefesh Shu Pasal Kid Rabbi Abba. So the Gemara says you're right. Everyone agrees that if halacha l'maisa, again, that if it's written in the shtar that we investigated the edus of these individuals and it turned out that the edus is not correct, that the edus obviously again that the shtar will be invalid. In other words, that's Rabbi Abba. In other words, that if it's clear that we looked at the shtar and we know that the edus is false, then of course, even if you hold edim mesira karsi, that is still going to undermine the effectiveness of the shtar. Lo nechloku el b'shtar she'ein alav edim klal. Interesting. Where's the machlokes? The machlokes will be in a case of a shtar that doesn't have any edus at all. The Rebbe Savar, Lak Rebbe Lazar, the Mesira Karsi, Rebbe holds that again, such a shtar like that will still be good. Even if no one signed on it, the shtar will still be valid, because Edim Mesira Karsi, Rebbe Shmuel Silber, Lak Rebbe Meir, Amar Edim Chasima Karsi. Rebbe Shmuel holds like Rebbe, and Rebbe holds Edim Chasima Karsi. And therefore, Allah L'maisa, if there's no Eidos on a shtar, the shtar will be invalid, and therefore you would have to rely on Chazaka. Be Baisim. And the other possibility is, Shabbos say this is also something that's surfaced a number of times throughout the last number of weeks, which is what happens when all of the parties involved admit that the shtar was written. The Rebbe Savar Moda B'Shtar Shakaso and Zarach L'Kaimo. Rebbe holds that if halacha l'maisa you have a shtar and everybody agrees that the shtar was written, there is no need for any type of certification. If you take a look at the Rashbam says, Ein tzarich l'kaimo, delo dami l'shar dinim, sha'pesha asur ha'pesha heter, sha'afilu im hayazem ha'arev, omer lo kasafti, lo hayan lo lachshod, ez zeh lokech bekach, shonech lishol lashol shtars mezuyafim, elashech, miru chachamim l'sar. So therefore again, Rebbe will say like this, if you have a shtar that everybody agrees to, then halacha l'maisa, there's no certification that's necessary. If there's no certification that's necessary, then one could use that over chazaka. Rabbi Shmuel Silber holds that no, even if both parties agree that the shtar was written, the shtar still has to be certified. But we heard just the opposite. We learned just the opposite. So we'll say this is an interesting case. Ruvain lent Shimon $1,000, and there was a document that said it. Now Ruvain and Shimon are both holding onto the shtar. Malva Omer Shelihu v'nafumenu masasiv. So what happens? So the lender says, the shtar is mine. I dropped it, and the borrower, Shimon, is holding on to it. But in other words, remember, Ruvain, the lender, holds on to the shtar until he collects from it. So Ruvain's claiming that the shtar was his, he dropped it, and Shimon picked it up, right? But ultimately, again, the debt is unpaid. Velova Amar, on the other hand, the borrower, right? Shimon says, Shalchahu v'nafal mimeni. I'm sorry. Velova Amar Shalchahu uparativ lacha. So ultimately, again, the borrower is saying, you're right, I paid back the debt already. I dropped it, and Lamai said, now you found it. So what's that lacha? Yiskayim hashtar b'chosam of divrei Rebbe. So Rebbe says, ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, we have to uphold the shtar based on the signatures, based on the witnesses. Rabbi Shmuel on the other hand holds that halacha l'maisa, you split it. So if you look at the Rashbam says, Yiskaim Ashar B'chos, the Rashbam is on the left-hand side now. V'gova le'mal ve'kule kid mefarish tam le'kamon. And again, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, according to Rebbe, ultimately, again, we uphold the shtar, and the lender could collect the entire amount. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds yachloku. V'avina ba, we ask on this, v'lesle l'Rebbe hadistan, does Rebbe not hold the following halacha? Shnaim ochsim b'talis, if two people are holding on to a talis, bab mitziyah, ze omer ani mitzasiyah, v'ze omer ani mitzasiyah, and both claim that they found it first. So again, each party swears that they own no less than 50%. So they should split it. If the shtar ultimately again is certified, everyone agrees that we split it between the Malva and the Lova, borrower and lender. Kipli, where's the Machlokas? B'she'ena Mekuyam, where the document is not certified. Rebbe Savar Mode B'shtar Shekal Satrach Lekaimo. Rebbe holds that in general, when both parties agree that the shtar was written, it still requires a certification. V'i Mekuyam Le Gavi Palga. So if the shtar is certified, then the lender could collect half. V'ilo, but if it's not chasba ba'almuhu, then ultimately again it's like garbage. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel holds Mode b'shtar shakasu in tzarach l'kaimo v'yachloku. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel on the other hand holds that halacha l'maisa, right, that if parties admit that the shtar was written, there is no need for certification, and therefore again halacha l'maisa they split the shtar. So I will say, so again, there's a contradiction, right? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi both contradicted what they said before. Epoch, the Gemara says no, not a problem. Just switch the respective positions. The other possibility is the olam lo sevach. No. Don't start switching around anything. Elahacha bilevarer kamiflagi. Shabbos is very interesting. So what's the machlokes over here? The machlokes over here is going ahead and doing a ber hadvarim investigation. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at the Rashbam. Elacha bilevarer kamiflagi. The Rashbam says, Adam shetoy lema'arer shnei minei chazakos yeshli. Achashish biyadi adayin shtar mechira sha'asisali al ze asada v'od sheyishli edei chezkas shalosh shanim. Right, so again, like our case over here, Ruvain's claiming, I bought it from you, Shimon, and I have two things. I have a shtar, and also, again, I have witnesses that say that I used it for the years of Chazak. V'ka'amar Rebbe nidam shtar shetzarech levarer ula ames es dvarav ula havi es ashtar kimo shetan ve'edei chazak b'loshar. So again, Rebbe says, so we'll see essentially, when Ruvain presents this, how much of an investigation do we have to do about his claim? So the Gemara says, now let's explain this. Ki had Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef have a masik bezuzi Rabbi Abba. So one time Yitzchak bar Zuzi lent money to Rabbi Abba. Asik made Rabbi Yitzchak nafka. They came before Rabbi Yitzchak nafka. Amar praticha bifnei ploni uploni, and he said, I paid you back in front of so and so and so and so. Amar le Rabbi Yitzchak, yavou ploni uploni v'ya'idu. So let those two witnesses that supposedly witnessed the repayment, let them come and testify. Amar le ilo asu lo mehemna, and tell me, and if they wouldn't come, you wouldn't believe me? V'ha kaimulan hamalbes chaveira be'edim einas rach lefara be'edim. But yet we learned that halacha l'maisa, if you lend someone money in the presence of witnesses, repayment doesn't have to take place in the presence of witnesses. So we see you don't have to call witnesses. So what's going on over here? Amar le ana kahi shmaita demar svirale. I hold like the other ruling of Mar. What happened? Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Adavar Ava, Amar Rav, Homer lechavera praticha. Bifnei ploni uploni, right? If Ruvain says to Shimon, I paid you back in front of witnesses. Tzarech she'avo ploni uploni v'ya'idu. Ultimately, again, you have to bring ploni uploni. So I will say what this means is as follows. So this is really very interesting. What the Gemara is suggesting is like this. Sometimes, if you make a claim, and the claim ultimately, again, is, the claim could be certified with less, but you give more information. So the shaila is, do you have to do the due diligence on the additional information or not? That's really the fundamental issue over here. That's what we mean, halacha l'maisa, by being mevarer. So do you have to go ahead? So now what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows, which is really quite interesting. Yeah, but right. So in other words, so for example, let me just clarify this a little bit. So in this case over here, right, Reuven's claiming that he bought the field from Shimon. Now Reuven's claiming that he has a shtar and chazaka. Now the truth is, once you have chazaka, you don't really need anything else. So the question just now becomes, now that he said that he's going ahead and he also has a shtar, right, then halacha l'maisa, do we have to investigate that shtar? That's the right. So what's fascinating about this is, on one hand, Reuven is providing additional information, right? All he had to say was, I used this property for the 3 years of chazaka. Done. There is nothing more to talk about after that. But in this case, he said, not only did I use it for the years of chazaka, but I also went ahead and have a shtar. So now the shaila is, do you have to be mevarer? Do you have to clarify the nature of the shtar or not? So the Gemara is suggesting, this is the machlokes, maybe Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, right? When Rabbi says nidon b'shtar, what Rabbi means, let's say, Reuven, listen, now that you mentioned the shtar, we got to do the due diligence on the shtar. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, no, leave it alone. He has chazaka. There's nothing really more that you have to talk about. So, and again, so the Gemara says, same idea over here, right? When in the case that we saw before, the Gemara said in the case of, who was it? Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef and Rabbi Abba. So now, again, the borrower said to the lender, I paid you back. And he says, I paid you back in front of so-and-so and so-and-so witnesses. So again, he didn't need to say that information. But now that he said it, so again, perhaps we have to go ahead and investigate the witnesses. Very interesting. So, Amrali, Ana Bar Ha'ishmaita Demar Svir Le'idam Rabbi Abba Amrav Ada Bar Ava Amarav Homer L'Chavera Praticha B'fnei Ploni Uploni. Again, if Reuven says to Shimon, I paid you back in front of Ploni and Ploni witnesses, then what's the halacha? So Ploni and Ploni have to now come and testify. Even though, again, technically speaking, we didn't need this. In other words, you don't have to pay back per se in front of witnesses, but because you gave the information, therefore you have to corroborate it. It's really quite interesting. So Rav Gidel said the name of Rav, that halacha l'maisa, the halacha follows Reb Shimon Gamliel. Namely, so remember again, so what we're suggesting now, so just to clarify what's happening over here, is the Gemara is suggesting, going back to the case, right? How do we start today's daf? We start today's daf with Reuven claims that Shimon sold him property. Now Reuven says, I have both a shtar and chazaka in order to prove my claim. So the truth is, remember, chazaka by itself is more than enough, doesn't need a shtar. So when Rabbi said, nidon b'shtar ultimately means that what? That Allah Chalamaysa, even though you didn't need the shtar, but now that you brought up the shtar, we have to investigate the shtar. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, not true. Chazaka is good enough. We don't even have to pay attention to the shtar. So now, Hamar of Kisa, the Gemara says, So Rav Gila is the name of Rav, namely that the halacha follows Rav Shimon Gamliel. Now what is that? Now what that would mean is that halacha l'maisa, when Reuven says I have a shtar and chazaka, we say I don't care about the shtar. Just tell me about the chazaka, and we are good to go. I va'af Rebbe lo amar. We'll say top of Kuf Aleph on the base. Kuf Ayin, 170b. Va'af Rebbe lo amar ela levarer. So again, so what's interesting in the Gemara says is like this, because even Rebbe said that halacha l'maisa, that it's not really the pshat that you need the shtar. Right? Rebbe just said, now that you mentioned it, so you have to go ahead and support it. Right? In other words, Rebbe is not arguing in principle with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Rebbe's agreeing that once you advanced chazaka, that's enough. But Rebbe's saying, but now that you said it, I know you didn't have to say it, but now that you said it, halacha l'maisa, you have to somehow certify that that's true. So again, ultimately, it's Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, says back to Rabbi Abba, you're right, I also meant just ultimately again that you don't actually need the shtar, but rather again halacha l'maisa, you just have to go ahead and be mevar the shtar, because he holds ultimately again like Rebbe in that situation. So it turns out that fascinatingly enough, the machlokes Rebbe Shimon Gamliel is if you advance a two-pronged claim, and one prong is unnecessary because your claim was already supported by the first part. In other words, so in this case, Reuven's claim of ownership was already supported by chazaka, but yet he still advanced shtar. So what do you do with such a situation like that? So again, Rebbe will say tzarach levarer. You need to clarify the shtar. You said it. Now that you said it, we got to clarify. Rabbi Shimon says no. We could ignore the shtar. ultimately, again, because we have chazaka. Incredible. All right, Mishnah, Amud Beis, Misha para miktas chavos. Well, it's a very interesting case over here. So Ruvain lent Shimon $1,000. Shimon paid back $500. Now, the problem just is, the only document they have is a document that says that Ruvain lent Shimon $1,000. So now, obviously, Shimon doesn't want that document in existence anymore because halacha l'maisa, he doesn't owe $1,000, he only owes $500. So what do you do now? Rabbi Yehuda Yachlif. Rabbi Yehuda says, Liyachlif. Now, Yachlif literally means exchange. The Rashbam says over here, Yikra oso ashtar v'yichtov lo shtar acher lefi cheshbon nishar mizman rishon ki levar shv'gemara. So he says, no problem, tear up the old shtar, write up a new shtar. Then the new shtar says that Shimon owes Ruvain $500. Okay. Rabbi Yossi says, no, yichtov shover. Rabbi Yossi says, no, just write a receipt. You don't have to write up a new shtar. Just Ruvain should write a receipt for Shimon that he received payment for $500. On Rabbi Yehuda, this is 1 second. Nimtza zeh tzarach lios shomer shovro min achbarim. Rabbi Yehuda says that's not fair. Then that puts the onus on Shimon, right? The Shimon's going to have to watch his receipt. Because if Shimon loses his receipt, remember, Reuben is holding a document that says Shimon owes him $1,000. So now you're placing the onus upon Shimon to watch his receipt from, right, literally again, to watch his receipt from getting eaten up by the mice. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi, kach yafelo. Kach yafelo v'lo yira kol choshazer. Rabbi Yossi essentially says, too bad, right? In other words, it's okay. We'll put the onus ultimately again on Shimon, and we're not going to compromise Ruvain. Incredible. So it says the Gemara, Amrav Huna Amrav, Ein halacha lok Rabbi Yehuda lok Rabbi Yossi. The halacha neither follows Rabbi Yehuda nor does it follow Rabbi Yossi. Elos, rather, what do we do? Ela bezin mekar nashtar v'kosfin lo shtar achar mizman rishon. Rather, again, what do we do? Halacha l'maisa, Beis Din will go ahead and tear up the initial shtar, and ultimately, again, write a new shtar from the first date. Right? So we'll say this is very interesting. Meaning, first of all, take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, "In halacha lo Rabbi Yehuda, shomer yachlov afilu lichtov lo bizman rishon ayidei edim below beis in the kid mefarish va'azil delo alimi edim likra shtar lahachlif uveligvos mizman rishon." So we'll say, we're going to see now. Interestingly enough, it kind of sounds that Rav Huna is saying the same thing as Rabbi Yossi. So what we're going to see, the distinction over here, sounds like Rav Huna is saying the same thing as Rav Yehuda, right? Because Rav Huna comes along and says, the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, nor is it like Rabbi Yossi. Rather, what happens? Ela Beis Din, Mekaran Hashtar, Beis Din rips up the first shtar that says that Ruvain lent Shimon $1,000. The Kosumo shtar acher mizman rishon, and writes for Ruvain a new document that says Ruvain lent Shimon $500 using the original date. Now we'll say, that sounds exactly like Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, but here's the difference. The difference is Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah holds that witnesses could do this. This doesn't have to be done by a Beis Din. In other words, so Ruvain lent Shimon $1,000. Now Shimon pays back $500. Witnesses could tear up the first shtar and rewrite a new shtar. Comes along and says, no. Witnesses can't do this. This has to be done inside of a Beis Din. So interestingly enough, procedurally, it's the same thing. We'll rip up the old shtar, write up a new shtar for the remaining amount, but the date of the transaction is the original date of the transaction. The difference is that Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah holds this could be done by witnesses, and Rav Huna holds it has to be done by a Beis Din. Amar li Rav Nachman Rav Huna, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Rav Huna, Ishmiya le l'Rav habraisa. What about if Rav? Now remember, this Rav Huna saying the name of Rav. If Rav would have heard the following brisa, what does the brisa say? Disanya. Edim mekarnes ashtar v'kosalon shtar achar mizman rishon hava hadebe. So ultimately, they asked Rav Huna, you're saying this in the name of Rav, but there's a brisa. What does the brisa say? The brisa says, in this exact case, Ruvain lent Shimon $1,000, Shimon paid back $500. So now what does the brisa say? The witnesses could tear up the old shtar and write a brand new shtar using the first date. So would Rav have retracted his first position, right? Would Rav have gone ahead and said differently? So Rav Huna said, Shmiale, Rav knew this brisa, and yet velo haderbe, but yet Rav did not go ahead and change his position. Now, why not? I will say top of Kuf Ayin Aleph 171a. Bishlama beidina alumilaf koimamona. Ela edim she'asu shlichusan chozin va'asin shlichusan. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara suggests, we're kind of going to, well, we can finish off. The Gemara says like this. So the Gemara suggests the following idea. Rav knew the Brisa. Rav absolutely knew the Brisa. But what was the problem? What problem did Rav have with the Brisa? Rav felt like this, that halacha l'maisa, a Beis Din is empowered to go ahead and act multiple times on the same transaction, right? Literally translated. So, Bishlam a Beis Din, alime la'afkuye mamona. Beis Din in general has the ability to take money. Therefore, again, because they have the ability to take money, therefore, halacha l'maisa, they can rip up the old shtar and make a new shtar. But Edim who were appointed for a specific reason, for what reason? To go ahead and halacha l'maisa write this first shtar. What power do they have to go ahead and tear up the old shtar and write a new shtar? It's not within their purview, right? It's not within their shlichos. So Gemara says, I don't understand why not. V'lo v'ha'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, Edim kosvin afilu asara shtaros asada achos. Now, why is that? The Gemara says, literally translated, Edim could go ahead and write 10 shtaros on the same piece of land. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at the Rashbam. Misha avad shtaro va'amrli edim kisfuli acher chozun v'kosin afilu asar shtaros im avdu zeh. This is actually interesting because this was a hotly contested topic over the last couple of days. If, let's say again, Reuven has a shtar, certifying his ownership of land, and he lost the shtar. And now he asks witnesses to go ahead and redo the shtar, right? So then halacha l'maisa, they could do that. So they could author, or they could sign on a replacement shtar even 10 times. So you see that Edim are empowered to do things beyond the initial scope of their agency, to which the Gemara says, no. So the Gemara says, that's a different case. Rav Yosef Amar b'shtar matana. So Rav Yosef says, that's different. That's talking about that case where the witnesses could keep writing over additional documents is a shtar matana. Because the shtar matana has no achrayas. So because it has no achrayas, because it has no guarantee, there's nothing wrong with the witnesses writing it over and over again. Rabbi says, b'shtar she'ein bo achrayas. Rabbi says, even if it's not a matana, again, the idea is the same idea, that ultimately, again, it doesn't have achrayas. So because it doesn't have achrayas, therefore, halacha l'maisa, witnesses could go ahead and write replacement shtar. So we'll stop over here for today, but suffice it to say, so here's what we have, right? So this interesting case, let's just frame the opinions. So the opinions that we have are as follows. Reuven lent Shimon $1,000. Shimon paid back $500. So now the problem just is, we have to do something because the document that exists no longer accurately portrays what in fact is going on. Because remember, Shimon has paid back half of the debt, so what do you do? So we've got 3 shitos. Rav Yehuda says, witnesses tear up the old shtar, write up a new shtar. What does the new shtar say? Reuven lent Shimon $500. And the date in the document is the original date of the loan. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says, no, absolutely not. Just write a receipt. Just write a receipt that Shimon goes ahead and paid back $500. Beautiful. Then comes along Rav Huna in the name of Rav and says, essentially, procedurally agree with Rabbi Yehuda, namely, tear up the old shtar and write a new shtar. But, what's the but? The but is, Edim can't do it. This has to be done in Beis Din. This has to be done in Beis Din, and only if Beis Din does it, ultimately, again, is it going to be mutter. All right, I will say, incredible. All right, I know we went a little bit quickly, but tremendous shkoyach. Looking forward to seeing everyone in person in Eretz Hashem Misha Tova U'Mitzlachos on Friday, and tremendous. Amazing to think that we're coming to the end of Basra as well. It's been such a beautiful and dramatic journey. All right, I will say shkoyach.